The sun had just started to rise over the small-town park, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. The air was calm, touched with the coolness of early morning, and the birds sang in cheerful harmony. It was the kind of morning where peace wrapped itself around the world like a warm blanket. In the middle of this gentle setting, an elderly woman walked slowly along the paved path. Her steps were small but steady, guided by a wooden cane that tapped against the ground with each movement. Her name was Mary Williams, a woman who had lived a long life full of struggles, sacrifices, and quiet triumphs. At 78 years old, her hair had turned completely silver and deep lines had marked her face. Yet her eyes carried a calm strength that came only from years of patience and endurance. Every morning, Mary came to this park. It had become part of her routine, almost like breathing. She liked the sound of children's laughter in the distance, the dogs chasing after thrown sticks, and the way the trees bent with the wind as if they were bowing in prayer. The park reminded her of simpler times when she would bring her little boy there to play. Back then, she would sit on the same wooden bench near the fountain, watching him run across the grass with a smile wider than the sky. That little boy had grown up to be a man the world respected, but no one in this park knew that. To them, Mary was just a quiet old lady who fed the birds and carried a worn-out bag filled with breadcrumbs. This morning felt no different, at least at first. Mary sat down on her favorite bench and took a deep breath. The smell of fresh grass mixed with the soft perfume of blooming flowers. She reached into her bag, pulling out a small paper sack of crumbs she had saved from yesterday's bread. The pigeons knew her well. Within minutes, they began to gather at her feet, waiting for her gentle hands to scatter food. "Good morning, my friends," Mary whispered softly, smiling as she tossed crumbs onto the ground. To anyone watching, she seemed harmless, just a grandmother enjoying her quiet morning. But life has a strange way of changing in an instant. On the other side of the park, 2 police officers had just finished their morning patrol. Their names were Officer Daniel Roberts and Officer Michael Harris, both young men, new to the force, still learning how to read situations. They had received a vague call from a nearby resident. The caller had said that there was an elderly woman loitering suspiciously in the park. The words carried weight. To the officers, it sounded like trouble waiting to happen. They were trained to act quickly, to prevent problems before they began. So when they spotted Mary sitting alone, feeding the pigeons with a large bag by her side, they assumed she might be the woman from the call. "Roberts, that must be her," Harris said, nodding toward Mary. "She looks harmless," Roberts replied. Though his tone was uncertain, Harris shrugged. "We can't take chances. Let's check." The 2 walked over, their boots crunching on the gravel path. Mary didn't notice them at first. She was too busy watching a little sparrow hop onto her shoe. When she finally looked up, she saw the 2 officers standing before her. Their serious expressions startled her. "Good morning, ma'am," Roberts said politely but firmly. "Can we ask what you're doing here?" Mary blinked, surprised by the question. "I'm feeding the birds," she answered softly. Her voice carried warmth, but it was also tired. The kind of tiredness that comes with age, not guilt. Harris frowned slightly, glancing at the bag by her side. "What's in the bag, ma'am?" "Just crumbs," Mary replied, lifting the sack with shaking hands. The birds liked them, but the officers exchanged a look that Mary didn't understand. To them, her answer seemed too simple, almost rehearsed. They had been taught that people who wanted to hide something often used simple words. As Mary sat there waiting for their next question, her mind drifted back to the past. The park had always been her safe place. She remembered walking here decades ago with her husband, John Williams, a kind man who had worked hard his whole life in a local factory. John had passed away many years earlier, but she still felt his presence when she sat on the bench they used to share. She also remembered the days when her son, David Williams, was just a boy. David was full of energy and dreams. He would chase pigeons around the fountain, laugh until his sides hurt, and then run back to her arms. She would kiss his forehead and remind him that kindness mattered more than anything else in the world. David grew up carrying those lessons with him. He worked harder than anyone, studied with determination, and eventually joined the military. Mary remembered the day he left for training, how his uniform seemed too big on him, and how she had cried silently after hugging him goodbye. Years passed, and David rose through the ranks, his name becoming known not just in their town, but across the nation. Yet to Mary, he was still that little boy who once held her hand as they walked through this park. Now, sitting on the bench, she had no idea that the misunderstanding with the officers would soon bring his name back into her life in a way she never expected. "Ma'am, do you live nearby?" Roberts asked, breaking her thoughts. "Yes," Mary replied softly. "Just a few streets away. I come here every morning." Harris crossed his arms. "We had a report about someone acting suspicious in this area. Do you have any identification with you?" Mary hesitated. She rarely carried her wallet when she came to the park. She didn't need it. She wasn't buying anything. She looked at them with honest eyes and shook her head. "No, I don't." The officers exchanged another glance. To them it looked like she was hiding something. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us until we can sort this out," Harris said firmly. Mary's heart sank. She had never been in trouble in her entire life. She had always followed the rules, paid her taxes, and raised her son to do the same. The thought of being taken away for simply sitting in the park felt like a heavy shadow falling over her. Is this really necessary?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We're just following procedure," Roberts said, though he looked slightly uncomfortable. Mary's cane shook in her hand as she tried to stand. The pigeons scattered, startled by the sudden tension in the air. Unbeknownst to the officers, a young woman jogging past had stopped a short distance away. Her name was Rachel Adams, a college student who came to the park every morning. She often saw Mary feeding the birds and had even spoken to her once or twice. To Rachel, Mary was a sweet old lady who never harmed anyone. Now, watching the officers question her, Rachel felt uneasy. Something about the situation didn't feel right. She pulled out her phone, quietly recording the interaction. She didn't know what would happen, but she wanted the truth to be seen. Mary, unaware of Rachel's camera, looked at the officers with pleading eyes. "Please, I just wanted to sit here for a while. This bench is all I have left of my family." Her words, filled with sorrow and love, seemed to hang in the air. For a moment, Roberts hesitated, but procedure, training, and doubt pressed heavier on him than compassion. "Ma'am, please come with us," Harris repeated. Mary sighed deeply, gripping her cane as she slowly rose to her feet. The park, once her safe haven, now felt like a place of fear. She could not have known that this moment, this simple misunderstanding, would soon reveal her true identity to the world. The officers guided Mary gently but firmly away from the bench. The pigeons scattered completely now, leaving only crumbs on the ground as if marking the spot of what had happened. Rachel kept recording, her heart racing with disbelief, and Mary, she walked quietly, her dignity still intact, even as confusion clouded her mind. She had no idea that her son, General David Williams, one of the most decorated military leaders in the nation, would soon learn of this moment, and when he did, nothing in the town or in the hearts of those officers would ever be the same again. The sound of Mary's cane tapping against the concrete path echoed in the quiet morning, as the two officers gently but firmly guided her toward their patrol car. She moved slowly, not because she was resisting, but because her body had grown old and weak. Her legs trembled with each step, and though she tried to keep her dignity, her heart felt heavy. The park that had once been her place of comfort now looked strange, almost unkind. The children playing in the distance stopped to watch, their laughter fading into silence. Dog walkers paused mid-step, pulling their pets closer. A few people whispered, their faces filled with confusion. They all knew Mary as the gentle woman who fed the birds. None of them understood why she was being taken away. Rachel Adams, the young jogger who had begun recording, followed at a distance. She didn't want to interfere directly, but she felt deep unease. Something about the sight of frail, silver-haired Mary being led away by two strong officers felt wrong. Rachel whispered to herself, "This isn't fair." She kept her phone steady, capturing every moment. As Mary shuffled forward, her mind wandered back to her son, David. She remembered the time he had tripped while running in this very park. He had scraped his knee badly, and though tears filled his eyes, he stood up bravely, refusing to cry. She had held him close then, telling him that real strength was not in fighting, but in standing tall through pain. Now, all these years later, Mary wondered what David would say if he saw her like this, an old woman being treated as though she were a criminal. She imagined his stern but kind voice. "Mom, hold your head high. You've done nothing wrong." That thought gave her a small piece of courage. Officer Roberts walked beside her in silence, his jaw tight. He was young, barely 30, and though he wanted to believe they were doing the right thing, something deep inside nagged at him. The woman beside him reminded him of his own grandmother, who used to knit sweaters for him every winter. Finally, he whispered to Harris, "She doesn't look dangerous. Are we sure this is right?" Harris didn't answer at once. His eyes stayed fixed ahead. "Look, Roberts, we had a call. We don't get to choose which ones to take seriously. We're just following procedure. But she's old. She's just sitting on a bench," Roberts pressed, his voice low. Harris sighed. "Maybe you're right. But what if you're wrong? What if she isn't who she seems? Then we'd be blamed for ignoring it." Roberts didn't reply. He just glanced at Mary, who walked with her head slightly bowed, the morning sun catching the silver in her hair. When they reached the police car parked near the entrance, Mary stopped for a moment to catch her breath. The walk had drained her energy. Her cane slipped slightly in her hand, and Roberts quickly steadied her arm. "Careful, ma'am," he said softly, his voice gentler now. Mary looked up at him with tired eyes. "Thank you, son, but am I really going with you?" "I've never been in a police car in my life." Roberts hesitated, feeling the weight of her words. Harris, however, stepped forward and opened the back door. "Just until we sort things out, ma'am. It's procedure." Mary lowered herself into the seat slowly, her cane resting against her lap. The door closed with a heavy thud, the sound echoing in her chest like finality. She looked out the window, watching the park disappear behind her. The fountain, the pigeons, the wooden bench that had held so many memories. Rachel, standing at a distance, stopped recording for a moment. Her hands shook as she whispered, "Someone needs to know about this." The ride to the small-town police station was quiet. Mary sat silently, her hands folded over her cane, her mind drifting to her late husband. She imagined John's gentle voice. "Stay calm, Mary. The truth always shows itself." When they arrived, the officers led her inside. The station was busy, filled with ringing phones, clattering keyboards, and voices giving reports. A few officers looked up in surprise when they saw the elderly woman escorted through the door. Roberts felt the stares. He leaned toward Harris and muttered, "This doesn't look good." But Harris simply guided Mary toward a chair near the front desk. "Sit here, ma'am," he instructed. Mary lowered herself slowly, her back aching, but she didn't complain. Instead, she looked around, her eyes calm but filled with quiet sadness. She had lived long enough to know that sometimes the innocent had to walk through difficult moments before truth came to light. Back at the park, news of the arrest spread quickly. Rachel had posted her video online along with a caption, "Why is this sweet elderly woman being taken away? She feeds the birds every morning. This doesn't feel right." Within minutes, the video began to circulate. People commented, many expressing outrage, others confusion. Some recognized Mary, mentioning how kind she was, how she had always smiled at children and spoken kindly to strangers. By afternoon, small whispers had turned into conversations. The town was beginning to talk, and soon the story would reach ears that mattered far beyond the park. Meanwhile, sitting in the station, Mary kept her dignity. She didn't raise her voice or argue. Instead, she sat quietly, her fingers gently brushing the handle of her cane. She thought of David again, her heart swelling with both pride and longing. She hadn't seen him in months. His duty kept him away, always traveling, always serving the nation. Mary closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the day he had been promoted to general. The room had been filled with applause, cameras flashing, officials shaking his hand. But to her, none of that mattered as much as the moment when David looked for her in the crowd, his eyes shining and mouthed the words, "This is for you, Mom." That memory warmed her now, even as the cold walls of the police station surrounded her. As the hours passed, Roberts grew restless. He sat at his desk, glancing at Mary often. She never complained, never argued, just sat with quiet patience. Finally, he walked over to Harris. "You know, Mike, I think we made a mistake. She doesn't belong here." Harris rubbed his forehead, frustration showing. "Maybe, but until the chief reviews it, we can't do anything. The call came in and we acted. That's all." Roberts sighed deeply, his eyes drifting back to Mary. Something in him knew this moment would haunt them both. As evening approached, Mary remained in the station, her quiet presence filling the room with an unspoken weight. Outside, the video of her arrest continued to spread, reaching more eyes with every passing hour. And far away across the state, a man in uniform, General David Williams, would soon be shown the recording. When he did, the life of every person involved would change forever. For now, though, Mary sat patiently, her heart steady. She believed in truth, in dignity, and in her son, the boy she had raised to stand tall no matter the storm. The police station grew quieter as the evening sun dipped below the horizon. The golden light filtered through the blinds, falling across Mary's silver hair as she sat quietly on the wooden chair near the front desk. Hours had passed, yet she had not raised her voice, not even once. Her calmness unsettled some of the younger officers who walked past. They were used to people shouting, arguing, or demanding explanations. But this elderly woman, with her gentle eyes and folded hands, carried herself with quiet dignity. Officer Roberts sat at his desk, unable to focus on his paperwork. He glanced at Mary again and again. Something about the situation gnawed at him. He thought of his grandmother, who used to tell him bedtime stories about courage and kindness. Looking at Mary now, he wondered if they had made a mistake that would not be easy to undo. Meanwhile, Officer Harris sat across the room, staring at his computer screen. He tried to ignore the uncomfortable thoughts creeping into his mind. He kept telling himself they had done their duty. They had answered a call, checked on a report, and followed procedure. Still, his heart felt heavy. While Mary sat in silence at the station, the outside world was stirring. Rachel's video from the park had begun to spread faster than she imagined. By late afternoon, thousands of people had watched it online. Comments poured in beneath the post. "I know that woman. She's always feeding the birds. She's harmless. Why would anyone call the police on her? This doesn't look right. Something feels wrong." Rachel sat in her small apartment, staring at the screen as the numbers climbed higher and higher. She hadn't meant for it to become so big, but something told her this story needed to be told. She thought about Mary's soft voice at the park, saying the bench was all she had left of her family. Those words had touched her heart in a way she couldn't explain. By evening, local reporters began sharing the clip. The image of a frail, elderly woman being led away by two young officers stirred emotions across the town. Back inside the station, Mary rested her hands on her cane and closed her eyes. Her mind drifted back to years long gone. She remembered her son, David, as a little boy with wide, curious eyes. He used to sit on her lap and ask endless questions about the world. "Mom, why do the stars shine?" he once asked when he was 7. "Because even the night needs a little light," she had answered, smiling. She remembered the way he used to run home from school, holding his books tightly, excited to tell her what he had learned that day. He was always determined, always dreaming bigger than his small town. Later, when he decided to join the military, Mary had been afraid. She worried about the dangers he would face, but she knew she couldn't hold him back. His spirit was too strong, his heart too brave. Through every letter he sent, he always reminded her of the lessons she had taught him: patience, kindness, and standing tall even when the world seemed unfair. Now, as she sat in the police station with strangers questioning her presence in a park, she leaned on those same lessons. Stay calm. Truth always finds its way. The hours dragged on. Roberts finally walked over to Harris, his voice low. "Mike, we need to rethink this. She's been sitting here for hours, and not once has she given us any trouble. Doesn't that say something?" Harris leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. "I know, but the chief hasn't reviewed the report yet. Until then, we can't release her." "We followed orders," Roberts frowned. "Orders are one thing, but what about humanity?" For the first time, Harris didn't have an answer. As night settled over the town, more and more people began talking about Mary. Some remembered how she used to volunteer at the local church decades ago, helping serve food to families in need. Others recalled her kindness at the grocery store, always offering a smile or a word of encouragement. To many, she was more than just an old woman in the park. She was part of the community's story, a quiet thread woven into the fabric of the town. Local television stations picked up the story, replaying the short video again and again. Viewers across the state watched in surprise as the silver-haired woman was gently but firmly guided away by police. The headline read, Elderly woman arrested in park, community questions why. Rachel couldn't sleep. She felt responsible in some way for what was happening. She had captured the truth, but now she wondered what would come of it. She sat at her desk, typing quickly on her laptop, writing down everything she knew about Mary. She described how she had often seen her at the park, how Mary would greet strangers kindly, and how the pigeons seemed to know her better than most people. She ended her post with one line: "She deserves respect, not suspicion." Her words touched many hearts. People began to share their own stories of seeing Mary in the park, describing her as a gentle soul. Far away, a son unaware. While the town buzzed with conversation, far away, in a military base across the state, General David Williams sat in his office. The walls were lined with framed medals and awards, symbols of years of service and sacrifice. He was respected across the country, known for his courage and leadership. Yet despite his many achievements, David often thought of himself simply as his mother's son. At that very moment, he was writing a letter to her, telling her he hoped to visit soon. He missed her cooking, her gentle laugh, and the way she always called him by his full name, David. No matter how many titles the world gave him, he had no idea that his beloved mother was sitting in a police station, her quiet dignity misunderstood. Back in the station, the clock ticked past midnight. Mary sat patiently, her eyes closing for a moment as exhaustion weighed on her. She whispered softly, almost like a prayer, "David, I hope you're safe." She didn't know that soon her son's name would be spoken across the town as people discovered the truth about who she was. And when that truth came out, it would not only change the way the officers saw her, but it would also remind the community of the power of respect, compassion, and justice. For now, though, Mary waited quietly, her strength not in loud words, but in silent endurance. The morning sun rose gently over the military base. Inside his office, General David Williams sat at his desk, reviewing reports. He was a man who carried authority with ease, yet those who knew him well always spoke of his kindness. His uniform, decorated with medals and ribbons, was a reflection of years of service and sacrifice. But beyond all of that, he was still Mary's son, a boy at heart who had grown up with lessons of humility and respect. He paused for a moment, leaning back in his chair. His eyes wandered to a framed photograph on his desk, his mother, smiling with her arm around him the day he was promoted to general. Her hair was already silver then, but her smile was as warm as ever. David touched the frame gently, whispering, "I'll see you soon, Mom." He had planned to visit her that weekend. It had been too long since he had sat with her on the porch, listening to her stories. But before he could return to his papers, there was a knock at the door. "General William," said Colonel James Peterson, his longtime aide, as he entered. "Sir, there's something you should see." David looked up. Peterson's expression was serious, almost hesitant. "What is it?" The colonel placed a tablet on the desk. "It's been circulating online since last night. I thought you should know." David pressed play. The screen lit up with the shaky recording from the park. He watched in silence as two young officers walked toward an elderly woman on a bench. His heart tightened as soon as he saw her face. It was his mother. There was no mistake. The silver hair, the cane, the gentle way she scattered crumbs for the birds. It was her. His jaw clenched as the video showed the officers guiding her away, her slow steps heavy with age. The sight of her being placed in the patrol car made his chest ache. David replayed the video twice, unable to believe what he was seeing. Finally, he looked up at Peterson. His voice was steady but firm. "Where did this happen?" "In your hometown park, sir," Peterson replied quietly. "It spread quickly. People are upset. They say she was taken in without cause." David's hands curled into fists for a moment, then he forced himself to relax. He had learned long ago that anger clouded judgment. His mother had always told him, "Stay calm, David. The world listens better when you speak with a steady voice." "I need to go there," he said, rising from his chair. "Of course, sir." Peterson nodded. "We'll arrange transport immediately." Meanwhile, in the small-town station, Mary still sat quietly in the same chair. A night had passed, but she had not lost her calmness. She had been given water, and one officer had offered her a blanket when the room grew cold. She thanked them with a soft smile, never showing bitterness. Roberts, who had been watching her since the beginning, finally walked over. "Ma'am," he said gently, "is there someone we can call for you? A family member, perhaps?" Mary looked up, her eyes tired but kind. "My son is away. He's busy with his duties. I don't want to trouble him," Roberts frowned. "Where is he?" She hesitated for a moment. To her, David was just her son, the boy she had raised. She rarely spoke of his position, never wanting to boast. "He works for the country," she said softly. "That's all." Roberts nodded, not pressing further. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story. By late afternoon, a military vehicle rolled into the quiet town. General David Williams stepped out, his tall figure commanding attention immediately. The uniform he wore caught the eyes of everyone nearby, but it was the look in his eyes, calm yet deeply determined, that left the strongest impression. He did not come with fanfare. There were no speeches, no salutes. He came as a son searching for his mother. Walking toward the station, memories of his childhood filled his mind. He remembered holding his mother's hand as they crossed the park, the way she laughed when he tried to chase pigeons, and the night she stayed up late sewing his school uniforms. She had been his foundation, his strength, and now she was sitting in a station because of a misunderstanding. The moment David entered the station, silence fell. Officers who had been busy with paperwork stopped to look. They recognized him immediately, not just as a man in uniform, but as one of the nation's most decorated leaders. His reputation was well known, even in his hometown. Roberts and Harris stood up quickly, their faces pale. They hadn't expected to face someone like him. David's eyes scanned the room until they landed on Mary. She sat in her chair, her cane resting against her lap, her silver head bowed slightly as if in prayer. "Mom," he said softly, his voice carrying both relief and sorrow. Mary looked up. Her tired eyes brightened instantly. "David?" she whispered. In 2 quick steps, he was at her side. He knelt down, taking her hands in his. "Mom, I'm here." I saw what happened. Tears welled in her eyes, though she smiled. "I knew you'd come. I wasn't afraid." Roberts swallowed hard, stepping forward. "General Williams." "We didn't know. We were just responding to a call." David turned to him, his expression calm but firm. "You saw an elderly woman sitting in a park feeding birds. Did she threaten anyone?" Roberts lowered his gaze. "No, sir." David's voice remained steady, but his words carried weight. "Then why was she brought here?" Harris shifted uncomfortably. "It was procedure. We didn't want to take risks." David shook his head slowly. "Sometimes humanity is more important than procedure." His words filled the room, leaving a silence that felt heavier than any scolding could. Mary reached up, gently touching her son's arm. "David, don't be hard on them. They are young. They still have much to learn." Her kindness, even after being misunderstood, struck everyone in the room. She was the one who had been taken from her bench, yet she was offering forgiveness before anyone even asked. Roberts blinked, his throat tightening. "Ma'am, we're sorry," Mary smiled softly. "It's all right. Every mistake can teach a lesson." As the evening settled, David helped his mother stand, supporting her with care. Together they walked toward the door, the weight of the moment following them. Officers watched in silence, realizing they had not only misjudged an elderly woman, but had unknowingly touched the life of one of the country's greatest leaders. But for David, none of that mattered. In that moment, he wasn't a general. He was just a son holding his mother's hand, guiding her gently out of the station and back into the light of the setting sun. And for Mary, the day ended not with bitterness, but with the comfort of knowing that truth, patience, and kindness always found their way home. The late afternoon sun bathed the city in golden light, but the atmosphere at the police station was far from warm. The weight of the misunderstanding had begun to sink into the officers' hearts. For hours, Margaret Johnson had remained in the holding area, her calm dignity never fading. Some officers avoided looking at her directly, ashamed of the way the situation had unfolded. Others whispered quietly, realizing more and more that this woman was no ordinary person. It was Officer Daniel who first received the call. His phone vibrated in his pocket, and when he answered, the voice on the other end was sharp and commanding. "This is General Michael Johnson," the voice said. "I was informed that my mother, Margaret Johnson, has been taken into custody. I need to know if this is true." The color drained from Daniel's face. He struggled to find the right words. "Yes, sir. She is here." But there has been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? The general interrupted. His tone was controlled but carried the unmistakable weight of authority. I'll be at your station within the hour. Do not let anything happen to her. When the call ended, Daniel sat frozen for a moment. He had heard of General Michael Johnson countless times. The man was a national hero, celebrated for his courage and leadership across the world. Awards and medals followed him wherever he went. But those who truly knew him always said the same thing, that his greatest pride was his mother, the woman who raised him with values of patience, dignity, and respect. The station grew tense when the news spread. The son of the elderly woman they had handcuffed in a park was none other than the most decorated general in the country. Officers exchanged worried glances. Suddenly, every decision they had made earlier in the day felt heavier, as though the walls themselves were pressing in on them. In the holding room, Margaret sat quietly. Her hands rested gently on her lap, and though her face was calm, her heart was filled with worry, not for herself, never for herself, but for her son. She knew Michael was a man of discipline, but she also knew he had a heart that burned with deep love for her. She didn't want him to be hurt or embarrassed because of what had happened. She whispered softly to herself, Lord, give him peace when he arrives. Don't let his anger consume him. Outside, the whispers grew louder. Officers debated quietly about what would happen when the general arrived. Some feared he would demand justice, others worried he would expose them to the public. But one thing was clear, nothing would remain the same after his arrival. An hour later, the sound of heavy boots echoed through the hallway. General Michael Johnson stepped inside the station, his tall figure commanding respect without him needing to say a word. His uniform was crisp, metals shining faintly in the evening light. The sight of him sent a wave of silence through the room. Even those who had never met him before instantly recognized his presence. Michael's eyes scanned the station, sharp and unyielding. He looked at each officer, but his gaze was not filled with rage. It was filled with something heavier. Disappointment. Where is my mother? He asked, his voice calm but powerful. Daniel stepped forward nervously. Sir, she is in the holding area. I'll take you to her right away. Michael followed him through the narrow corridor until they reached the small room. The moment the door opened, Margaret lifted her head. Her tired eyes softened when she saw him, and a small smile touched her lips. Michael, she said gently, as though his name itself was a prayer. The general's stern face melted instantly. He rushed to her, kneeling down so his tall frame could be closer to hers. Mama, he whispered, his voice cracking despite his attempt to hold it steady. I'm so sorry. They should never have treated you this way. Margaret placed her hand on his cheek. Hush now. Don't carry anger in your heart. I'm fine. The officers standing outside the room could hear every word. Each one of them felt the weight of her calm grace. Here was a woman who had been handcuffed and humiliated, yet she carried no bitterness. Her dignity was something none of them could ignore. Michael turned his head toward the officers. His eyes narrowed. Do you understand who this woman is? She is the reason I wear this uniform. She raised me to serve this country, to protect its people, and to stand for what is right. And this is how she is treated? The room fell silent. No one dared to answer. Margaret touched her son's arm, urging him to calm down. Michael, don't shame them. They acted without knowing. Sometimes people only see with their eyes, not with their hearts. Her words hung in the air like a lesson too powerful to ignore. The officers shifted uncomfortably, realizing she was speaking not only to her son, but also to them. General Johnson stood tall again. He looked at the officers, his voice steady. My mother may forgive you, but I hope you never forget this moment, because respect is not given only to rank, medals, or titles. Respect is owed to every single person, no matter their age or their color. His words struck deeper than any punishment could. Several officers lowered their heads, their cheeks burning with shame. As paperwork was hurriedly cleared and Margaret was officially released, the general remained by her side, holding her arm gently as they walked out of the station together. The world outside had darkened into evening, but the streetlights glowed faintly, guiding their steps. Margaret leaned slightly against her son, her voice calm. Michael, promise me you won't let this wound your heart. People make mistakes. What matters is what they learn afterward. Michael looked at her, his eyes softening again. I promise, Mama. But I also promise this. What happened today will not go unseen. It will be remembered, not to bring anger but to bring change. Behind them in the quiet station, the officers stood still. Each one carried the image of the elderly woman and her decorated son. For some, it would be a lesson that changed the way they treated people forever. And for Margaret, though the day had been heavy, she knew that her son's heart still carried the values she had planted in him long ago. That was enough for her. The sun rose softly the next morning, painting the town in gentle gold and pink hues. For many, it was just another day. But for the small town and its people, the events of the previous day had left an impression that would not fade quickly. The video of Margaret Johnson, the elderly woman, and her son, General Michael Johnson, had spread far and wide. News outlets shared the story repeatedly, praising her dignity and highlighting the lessons learned from what had happened. At the Johnson family home, a modest house at the edge of town, Margaret walked slowly down the familiar garden path. Flowers bloomed along the edges, and the morning air carried the scent of freshly watered soil. She inhaled deeply, taking comfort in the simple things she had always loved: the smell of flowers, the warmth of sunlight, and the feeling of peace that came from being home. General Michael Johnson followed closely behind, his tall figure moving carefully to stay near his mother. Though he was one of the most decorated military leaders in the country, today he walked humbly, letting her guide the pace. His mind still replayed the events of yesterday, but a sense of calm had settled over him now. "Mom," he said gently, "I can't imagine how difficult yesterday must have been for you. I wish I could have been there sooner." Margaret looked at him with soft, tired eyes. "It was only a moment, Michael. What matters is that everything is understood now. People will learn. That is what matters." Michael nodded, understanding her wisdom. She had always been a teacher in his life, teaching kindness, patience, and dignity in every moment. Even now, after everything, she remained calm, forgiving, and gentle. The town's reaction had been immediate and heartfelt. Local newspapers ran feature stories about Margaret, calling her a symbol of patience and courage. Online, thousands shared their own memories of seeing her at the park, of the kind words she had given, of the help she had offered silently over the years. One local teacher, Mrs. Sanders, said in an interview, "Margaret Johnson taught our children something simple yet profound: that everyone deserves respect, no matter their age or situation." The officers involved also began to reflect deeply on what had happened. Roberts and Harris were summoned by their chief for a debriefing, not as a punishment but as a learning moment. Both men were honest about their feelings of guilt and regret, and the chief emphasized the importance of compassion alongside procedure. "This is a lesson none of us will forget," the chief said. "We must always remember that people are more than appearances. Today could have been a tragedy, but because of patience and understanding, it is instead a lesson in humanity." Roberts and Harris left the station with heavy but enlightened hearts. They had seen the power of one woman's dignity, and it had changed them forever. Back at home, Michael and Margaret sat on the porch, looking out over the quiet town. Michael poured them both a cup of tea, and they sipped it slowly, letting the silence speak. "Mom," Michael began, "I've been through a lot in my life. I've faced challenges in the battlefield, in politics, in leadership. But nothing taught me as much as what I saw yesterday. Your calm, your courage. It was a lesson I'll carry forever." Margaret smiled softly. "You've always had the strength, Michael. I only tried to guide it. Remember, true strength is not in the medals or awards. True strength is in patience, in humility, in facing challenges with a steady heart." Michael's eyes shimmered. "You've given me more than the world could ever measure, not just as a mother, but as a teacher of life." She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "And you've made me proud every day, my son." The story of Margaret Johnson also sparked conversations across the town and beyond about respect, understanding, and compassion. Citizens began sharing stories about how they could treat the elderly, the vulnerable, and anyone misunderstood with more care. Community leaders held town hall meetings to discuss how such incidents could be prevented, focusing on communication and empathy. At the local park, where the incident had begun, a small group of townspeople gathered. They placed a simple plaque on the bench where Margaret had sat, reading, "To Margaret Johnson, a woman whose patience and dignity remind us all of the power of kindness." Children ran past, laughing and pointing at the bench while parents explained that the woman who once sat there taught an important lesson. For many, it became more than a park bench. It became a symbol of humanity.